So I guess I can do this. Hi, we're starting out a little late, but first things first, stand, pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have up to bat today, but before that we'll have public comment, but we have up to bat today the school budget. That is the primary reason for this meeting tonight. And Jim has quickly made copies of his presentation since the electronics are down in this room. They may be up later this week, but not tonight. Do we have anyone from the audience that would like to make a public comment before we begin? Nope? Okay. We want to wait for the superintendent for first, or? Hopefully everyone's going to stay warm.
What's that?
Hopefully everyone will stay warm the next few couple days. Well, I pay attention to where my brother lives out in Imlay City, Michigan, and I'm not sure anyone saw my Facebook post, but I put the post of Imlay City as I'm glad I'm not there this week.
Is that gonna be like feel like negative 50?
Yeah,
Something like that?
something like that. It's brutal.
Yeah, the ambient temperature.
But his is even
-20 out there.
worse because he boards horses, and I'm not sure what he's doing with all the horses. I think they're coming inside the riding. He has a large indoor riding arena.
Yeah, they can't stand this. That's too
You know
cold.
what? They've raised 2 or 3 fawns that would have been orphaned, and they've had them up on their laps in the living room. Oh yeah.
Pictures on Facebook of you with your family and your brothers. It looks like the coolest place ever.
It is.
really does.
It's a lot of fun.
Wonderful ranch.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Should we wait another minute, 30 seconds?
Should we approve the minutes while we're waiting?
That's a good idea. Thank you. Sasha, you're on top of things here. So we have the minutes from the last meeting before you, and we can review them. I've already spoke to Angela about one correction, but before she makes the correction, I wanted to verify with everyone in this room who was there relative to the CIP. There was discussion of CIP, and on the second page, Lynn Savage said, move down to the facility master plan. Move down to the facility master plan 2, the $50,000 funded for assessment costs with such things that are associated with school renovations, fire department, parenthetically, out country. That was actually brought to my attention about, oh, you're building a fire department out in the out country? It's got to be a new one. Like, no. It's a renovation of the one that's out by the town center. So that's, if anyone disagrees with that, I'm sure, Lynn.
Let's not start rumors over here.
Yeah, it was actually our former chair who called me on this and said, you letting us, new fire department out there? I go, nope. So if you could just correct that. Any,
I move to, sorry, your
No, fine.
comments? No, sorry. I move to approve the meeting minutes from the meeting dated January 8th, 2019.
do I have a second or any comments, discussion?
As amended.
As
As
amended.
as amended.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Thank you. With that, I'd like to introduce our superintendent, Dr. Greg Gilligan, and with his CFO, Jim Mealy, who are here to present to us the school budget for fiscal year 2020. And Sasha and I met with the gentleman a week or so ago, just to find out where we are in the current state of things. And I've asked Jim and Greg to talk about the current state of our fiscal year 19 budget, so that we have in context of where we're going with the fiscal year 20 budget. So with that, I turn it over to our superintendent and Jim.
Great, well, thank you for having us. First and foremost, I do want to say congratulations to Andrew Mailer. He's been a tremendous strategic partner for the schools. I'm going to miss his creativity, his insight, our weekly meetings, and I think that the schools have benefited under his leadership. At the same time, I'd like to congratulate Lynn Savage as the interim or acting, I'm not sure what the official title.
I agree. To both.
As someone who'll be working a lot more closely with Lynn during weekly meetings, I know that there is no one better in North Andover that knows the finance, and she's done a tremendous job for years, and I think she's quite an asset to the town, and I look forward, and I know Jim looks forward to working with her. So that being said, a couple components, and I see we don't have the screen, so everyone have a handout. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I just want to do a couple things, because I'd like to really take you through this budget process, but at the same time, I'd also like to address where we are this fiscal year. What do you think would be easiest, Jim, for us to do that made sense?
It makes sense while we're going.
Yeah, while we're going through, we've incorporated it through, but we can certainly spend some time at the end if that makes sense.
It's your presentation, and everyone should have, as part of their packets, the updated anyways that you had presented, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, so first and foremost, if you take a look at the section called Budget Process Overview, I think it's really important to note that in North Andover we have a strategic plan that's very thoughtful, it's very well thought out, and it encompasses 3 areas: all students, professional practice, and consistent and rigorous curriculum. One of the other things we take into account with the budget process are the school committee directives, and that's something we know that we try to work within the spirit of those to head to that direction. Sometimes there can be aspirational goals in there as well, but that's where we work. Last but not least, also take into consideration for the budget, I have the unique opportunity to be the new superintendent of schools here, so it's my first year. And part of what I also start to look at is I conducted an entry where I met with approximately 1,136 people. 600 by survey and the remainder in person, and asked a series of 9 questions. So we were able to gather quite a bit of data. And when I set my goals this year as a superintendent and the school committee with some shared goals, we talked about really trying to continue to strive and meet the benchmarks and timelines within the strategic plan that was approved on June 21st of 2018 for this school year, but also reserve the right to use some of the information to make a change or two or a recommendation that may be very well needed in this budget cycle. And there's actually really one instance where we did that. Looking at the level services, data-driven, what's working and what's not. As you know, carrying over the salaries, the contracted services, the materials, and then we look at the proposed initiative based on the strategic plan, which is really a running 3-year plan, and some components like the curriculum plan and the student services plan extend to 5 years. And also looking at the capital improvements plan for 5 years and the facilities master plan, which I know that you're very familiar with. So, in a nutshell, I sometimes often take for granted what we mean by these objectives in the strategic plan. So there are 3 main objectives, and under each of the objectives, there are very specific initiatives. If you go online at northandoverpublicschools.com and take a look at our strategic plan, you'll see that we've had different phases over time, and we've been very successful in the last few years in meeting goals, sunsetting goals. Phase 1 complete, phase 2 complete. Now we're in phase 3, and we're taking a hard look at where we are. What have we completed this year? What is in progress, and what some areas? And there's occasionally, with so many components going into this, an area that we have to, continue on or have more of a multi-year approach. That being said, I think one of the really nice things about working with the leadership team developing this budget is that, in my opinion, as the new leader of the district, we also need to examine everything that we currently have, and we'll be doing that this spring as we prepare the strategic plan for the end of the year for approval moving forward. But we also have to take a look at, with that plan, a multi-year approach. Some things that, traditionally sometimes people put in 1 year. I think we need to be really thoughtful and realistic about a multi-year approach. And an example would be that we've been looking at the structures of administration across the district. So that's been in our strategic plan for many years. One of the examples is we already took action about a year ago. Actually, it might be the second year now at North Andover High School, where several years back, the department heads for content areas were eliminated. Simply put, I don't believe you can run a high school as someone who used to be in charge of curriculum with 1,450 plus students without a content expert in each of the areas that run those departments. Now we're looking at the pre-K through 8. Now, we'll be making some recommendations, and that's going to be probably a multi-year, but you'll see some small changes coming up for next year. So all students, really, that's to ensure all students are provided with equal access to an excellent education. And, when we talk about all students, we're talking about kids who get it right away. We're talking about students that struggle. We're talking about students in our district where there's 27 different languages. We service many EL kids. We talk about high-need students, and the Commonwealth defines high-need students by someone whose English is not their first language, someone who's economically disadvantaged, or that receives special education. And we have different unique makeups of our district. Thompson and Atkinson School are close to 60% free lunch, which, by the way, is no longer the determining factor. We're probably one of the few states that no longer uses that as a statistic. They use something called economically disadvantaged, and that group has to receive some type of government benefit, whether it's WIC, food stamps, et cetera, to be in that category. And there's some issues with that, but we're not going to get into that tonight. Professional practice, develop and hire the best educators possible. I mean, we have a pretty rigorous hiring process, and more importantly, I think we put on the best professional development in the region. We just had professional development on the 18th of January, where we had 90 sessions take place in an ed camp. Any of those from tech, we've taken that model, and additionally, we had 15 districts from across the Commonwealth working on social studies curriculum mapping and science curriculum mapping up at our middle school. Pretty excited. And consistent and rigorous curriculum. Some of the examples of putting in the Eureka Math, the Lucy Calkins writing, the new science standards at the middle school, reviewing and making sure we're up to date with all the standards at the high school, particularly as we're being reaccredited with a visit next fall. So, school committee budget directives, as you can see, they don't often change year to year. There's one thing I do want to point out. We've been making significant progress, and this recommended budget, this will make the third budget where we're continuing to add teachers to the elementary. I proposed 3 here. 2 maybe classroom teachers. One thing I think it's important to keep in mind, and we'll get into this later, is when you add classroom teachers, you also might need additional specialists, whether that's art, music, PE, because it's another class that has another section of that. And the other thing is, my predecessor really liked to use percentage over the recommended guidelines. That's probably something I think was very effective for the time. It wasn't that long ago when elementary classes were in the low 30s, and 4 years ago, I think we were a little 40% plus over the recommended guidelines in our elementary classrooms. And I put in here as one of the goals, or working with the school committee, that 7.9% could be seen as an effective zero. I think what's important to note is what's an easier metric for folks to understand is when we look across our district at an average, because, for example, the Kittredge School. Anyone have kids at the Kittredge or go through the Kittredge? You went to the Kittredge.
Went to the Kittredge.
And there were 2 of every grade, weren't there?
There were.
There still are 2 of every grade.
There is.
So, that number can easily get skewed. You're 1 over, and it really, on the average, might look, like really good. But if it's 1 over, it's going to skew the percentage of classes over that. And, it would probably be detrimental to say you've been here 4 years, but we're going to pick 1 kid to move out so that we can meet this guideline. So I think, in the future, we'll be moving towards probably an average to say, okay, the state average is 19.6. Where are we in terms of that, and where are we in terms of making progress? Because smaller class sizes are definitely a benefit at that level, especially with the complexity of the kids we see today.
Is that an average at each level, elementary, middle school, high school, or is that an overall average across all the?
No. It's very, very different at every level. So, for example, our middle school has some of the highest, it's probably the highest versus our 20 comparable communities at 24.5. The high school, as someone who worked in a high school for 10 years, I can tell you this. There's a lot of different ways to do averages in high schools. The part that makes it tricky is often what perspective the high school principal is coming from with those numbers. We've really narrowed it down for us to look at what are the core classes. So say you take science, for example, at North Andover High School. And you can't quote me, but it's roughly in the ballpark here. So if you looked at AP, honors, and college prep, those are the three main sections. You know, AP has the highest enrollment. It's like 25 and change, maybe closer to 26. Honors is in the 23 range, and college prep is something like 21.9. You know, I'd have to go back and double check, but roughly around that. The issue you get in high schools, and when you look at state data, is there are just often specialty classes. A special education course where there's science involved may have 9 kids. You may have an AP 5 German class that has 13. So when you do an average, you really, it can throw that number off. And one of the things we're working on very closely is monitoring, you know, what do the core classes look like so we have a real understanding. Because with the NEASC accreditation, we'll be looking at, which is very intensive. If anyone went to college in New England, anyone go to college in New England? Your college was accredited by the New England Associations of Schools and Colleges, as all are the high schools in the Commonwealth. So that's something we'll be looking at, and that accreditation will have recommendations and commendations, which will serve as a blueprint moving forward. So those are the school committee.
So my one comment on the looking at classroom size. When you set that standard, let the people understand what the standard is, the basis of it, and then be consistent so that you can be measured. It can change, obviously, but be consistent as far as how it's reviewed every year. This percentage over is always like, you know, I cocked my head out and I didn't quite understand it. And then when you gave me the details of these classroom sizes, I said, something doesn't quite compute. So I'm happy with where you're going with.
You know, and it's no criticism of, you know, the former superintendent. It's just simply a metric that she used, and you know, in some way, when we were so far over,
It was appropriate.
it may have been, probably was a good thing for us at the time.
Yep. I'm not disagreeing or saying.
No, just a commentary, you know, and the other piece is, these guidelines, you know, several years back, would seem almost impossible to hit.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn a few slides over to Jim.
I've done this in a lot more slides in past years. If you want me to, I can expand on it, but I thought I can break it down to 2 slides this year. Just to kind of explain that the operating budget isn't the only source that we have each year to provide for the students in North Andover. We do have the general fund, but we also have revolving accounts, the largest being community programs, food services, and athletics, and others as well. We also get funding from grants. 240 grant for special education is the largest. We've seen some hits to our Title I grant over the last couple of years, especially this year. But that's another source. Circuit breaker is the reimbursement we get the following year for our special education costs. Like this year, we'll get reimbursed next year for any student that costs us more than it's 40. It goes up every year. It's 4 times the per student allotment, and so it's usually in the low 40s. So any student that costs us more than that is eligible for reimbursement the next year at whatever percentage they fund circuit breaker. The maximum is 75%. It's usually around 70, between 65 and 70%. And we usually, as a district, get between $1.4 and $1.6 million. So when you see in the budget a number for out-of-district costs, you can add, on average, $1.5 million to that to get the total out-of-district costs in any one year. Capital projects, not part of the operating budget, obviously, but having needs met through that. One of the things that's going to appear this year at town meeting and for the next few years is an allocation for paving. If you've driven any of our school driveways, you know we need to pave them. there's quite a few potholes, especially at the high school, and that will be one of the first ones we do. But, so starting this summer, if it gets approved at town meeting, we'll have $150,000 for the next 4 years to take care of our paving needs. We use the same firm that the DPW uses, Beta, to come in and assess our needs and give us estimates, and that's how we came up with the submittal. So $150,000 in the next 4 years, and then $50,000 in the years after that to maintain. So we should be in pretty good shape with paving once we get to that point. We're doing the same thing with drainage. The following year, we're putting in $50,000 a year to take care of our drainage needs at our schools, and that will be an annual amount as well. So we're trying to be proactive, get them where they need to be, and then keep them there. Indirect expenses, when I do the end-of-year report for the state, there's quite a lot of money that some school districts, and this is why it's hard to compare school districts' budgets. Even if you looked at a district that had the same enrollment as us, they might have their health care costs, insurance costs, in their operating budget where we don't. It's separate, so when we do bring it all together, that's what we call indirect costs. It's the insurances, it's the unemployment, whatever other expenses are charged due to a school district employee. It's important to note that when they do the state averages on per pupil spending, when I do the end of the year report, what they're trying to do is allow themselves to be able to compare apples to apples. So everything gets put in, whether it's in your operating or somewhere else, and that way they can compare districts using the same metrics. So that's indirect expenses. The shared expenses are those departments that we have worked with the town and share. Facilities is a good example. Having a facilities manager has been a tremendous help to us. Having IT work together. We do have an IT director that's school specific, but being able to work with Chris McClure and the network manager has been very helpful. And then legal is another one that we are considering consolidated, and that has been impossible to tell you how great that's been to have somebody that you always were concerned about picking up the phone. How much is it going to cost me to get legal advice? Can I try to figure this out on my own? It's great to have somebody you can just call and not worry about that and know you're getting good advice. So that's been very helpful. But those expenses need to be reported as well. And then the Medicaid reimbursement is fairly new in that over the last couple of years now, we've been able to use the money that is specific to services provided to students who are eligible for Medicaid. There's a reimbursement for that. It used to come in to the town and be part of the total allocation that was available. And the last couple of years, it's been made specifically available to the school department to use for curriculum. And then Special Education Stabilization Fund, I believe you're aware of that one. And that one is just to try to mitigate the impact of variances that occur, unanticipated expenses, especially out-of-district costs each year. And so I just summarized in the next chart how much that totals in any given year. And this year we're hitting the 70 million mark. Our general fund is proposed at 50.5 million. Revolving accounts generally produce about 3.3 million. The grants about 1.8. Circuit breaker, as I said, 1.4 to 1.6. Indirect expenses are just over 12 million. Consolidated accounts are just under $1 million. Medicaid reimbursement is right now at 400,000, and SPED education stabilization is a maximum of 250,000 in any given year. So a total of that 70.8 million you see there is what we would project for FY20.
Is that would that be considered a comp to other districts in the
That's
Commonwealth?
right. Other than, well, yes, in the fact that basically what you report in the end of year report is what did you spend from wherever you got it. And so, yes, that would be what
pretty
would
close
be
to it.
compared to other districts.
Okay.
Yep.
The Medicaid reimbursement, you're saying you're not restricted in how you can spend it? That goes right into.
No,
your
it's for
general fund?
curriculum only.
We made an agreement to spend it on curriculum only with the town manager in perpetuity to protect ourselves from it, because in tough times and when it's cyclical, what happens, and, you know, as someone who's been an employee here for over 21 years, we try to protect people so that we have more folks in the classroom. One of the issues is, you know, we went a good 7 or 8 years without the funding to update materials and provide those updated materials. So the ability for us, and believe me, it was a lot of hard work, and I credit a lot of folks in this office. We had about 14% signed by parents with a one-time signature for that money to come back into the town. And when we discussed what other communities are doing in creative ways around curriculum, we went out and got, we're at a 96% signed rate. And I can personally tell you that myself and many of the staff in this building had been to 50, 60, 70 different houses in the town to get these signed.
So when you said this money goes to the town, so it still goes into the municipal coffers, but the agreement is that this portion comes towards the schools. When you first said it, I thought perhaps the state was allocating it directly towards the school budget, but no, that's not so.
No, and
No.
actually, we're still kind of working on.
The mechanism.
We can attest to this, the mechanism for how it can be accessible for us. We're pretty confident now it's gonna require some action at town meeting
Right, so what
to do
happens
so.
is the state looks at it as, declares it as a local receipt for the town.
Mhm.
So it's going into the local receipts on the general fund, and then at town meeting, a vote will be made to move it from the town general fund over to the school department.
Okay.
as a
So it's all
transfer.
dependent on the relationship and working agreements between you and our town manager, or Lynn, right now, so.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we, you know, I think it's fairly well memorial.
I'm just clarifying that
Yeah.
this is.
This is fairly well memorialized as a practice. It's a game changer for North Andover. You know, we can only spend what we have in there, and these are reimbursements for the services that we provide kids in school.
It's a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
That's cool.
When I first started here 10 years ago, it was $450,000 in the budget for curriculum materials. And probably that year, it went away and didn't come back until Medicaid was made available.
Yeah, I can say as assistant superintendent for 6 years in charge of all teaching and learning, we continued from the stretch of 2012 to 2016 making significant progress on standardized testing. And it was really, we had done just about everything we could for free in terms of collaboration, sharing best practices, lessons. We're fortunate to have teachers that really go the extra mile. But it's not only important about having the curriculum materials, it's also about providing the appropriate professional development so that we can implement this, support the teachers, because otherwise, you know, a lot of districts, they'll buy the materials and say, good luck. You know, and we've put in some curriculums in the last couple of years, like Eureka Math, Lucy Calkins, new science standards at the middle school, work at the high school, that have really made a difference. And that wouldn't have been possible without these funds. So, the overall financial picture. And like Jim said, we'll get into the 19-20, but in a nutshell, I think it's important to talk about the 19, you know, as we started to look at this budget and as a first-year superintendent. We were really transparent about any issues or deficits that we had presenting to the school committee this fall, December. And we talked about it a little bit in November because two things that could attribute to some of the difficulties that we had. One was the Brad Street School and several unanticipated costs associated with the Brad Street School, including us picking up, you know, early on some parking spots. You know, we didn't have enough spots necessarily for all the staff that were needed. Yeah. Yeah, just like Southie, where Jim's from. And then secondly, with staffing, you know, as someone new, not getting into the building till 3 days before, you know, 355-year-olds are quite a lot of kids to be 5 years old, plus the 150 in the pre-K. And with the site work not completed, with not places for kids to go in the morning like typical schools where we put them in the yard, you know, we didn't have any of those places necessarily available. So things just like teachers being on duty, they go on duty. We run a duty schedule where there's typically 5 or 6 teachers on duty. You know, it's been bargained. This is how we do it. It works at every school. But here now we have to put the kids somewhere. You know, and having to put them in the classrooms caused us some extra supervision and evaluation until we could get the site work done outside and come up with a different plan. I was also under the impression that we could fit the kids into the CAFA gymatorium all at once, particularly just the K. And, you know, that first day I looked in there, do you ever go to a house, an open house, where there's nothing in it? And you're like, this place is huge. That being said, once we put the stuff in, it was quite smaller than anticipated. And, you know, I'm not sure exactly what happened in terms of the building, but I know it was reduced a little bit for cost, which was a challenge. And another cost that came with it is, in order to get a permanent occupancy certificate, you know, some substantial work had to be done to the tune of probably about $75,000, $80,000 in the kitchen to dig up some pipelines, to put in a required sink. I'm not sure during the process, you know, how that happened back in probably the previous fall. But those were some of the unanticipated costs associated with opening that building. The second component is, you know, we definitely need some therapeutic intervention programs that, you know, we have some successful ones, but we definitely see the need for more. The previous superintendent had put some in at the end of the year in May at the Thompson School and at the Middle School. The cost at approximately $323,000, if my memory serves me correctly, Mr. Maley. And, you know, those anticipated, the savings used to put that forward wasn't necessarily exactly where it should have been, possibly because of some other things that happened with special education at the end of last year. So that brought us to really no wiggle room. And I'm really proud to say that our staff's worked really hard this year. We haven't sent one student out of district since that started with us in September. Now, I know we may have one in the pipeline, but as you guys know, special education and IDEA law and federal law, it can be expensive. And these kids definitely deserve this education. I mean, they're in need of it. But we had several kids move in this year that we incurred costs of, we had 2 move in early on at the cost of $311,000. We had a couple more move in or pending move ins. We're still negotiating what that may look like because there's a cost share by the part of the other community under the law. And then we had a couple students that were outplaced that went to significantly higher outplacements. So between the unanticipated costs that we experienced at the ABECC and I would say the special education costs were really important. I'd say one thing with the proposed budget before we go on is we took a hard look. I mean, we worked hours, countless hours as a leadership team. And the leadership team, unlike a lot of times districts, people just advocate for their level of their school. I feel really proud to work in a place where we really try to advocate for your school and your needs, but look at a perspective of a whole district, pre-K through 22 years old. And, you know, as we did that and we started looking at that, we really looked hard at eliminating the programs that were just added in September, or at least one of them. My late father used to sometimes use a phrase called penny wise, pound foolish. You know, there's a couple transitions taking place. One is here in central office, and I'll talk about this later, I'm restructuring from the position of assistant superintendent back to a position of director of special education. The majority of that job is a focus on special education. And 2 things. Although we haven't realized any savings with that program this year, there's a need. There's a growing need. There are some kids in the pipeline. And frankly, at $323,000, 2 or 3 kids that would be placed out could cost that. At the same time, you know, with the shift here in central office, and I only mentioned that, when we go out to recruit to bring kids back, because I believe I believe North Andover kids should be educated in North Andover, we can do it. I don't like when kids get on a bus for an hour each way. I think it's wrong. So if we have the ability to do it here, great. But secondly, you eliminate a program and then say we need it next year. No parent in America in their right mind would say, yeah, we're at this great placement, but we're going to try the new program out because it needs to be established and worked out. And, you know, that's common everywhere. So I just wanted to put that in. But as you can see here, excluding One of the programs, level services, the carrying over from last year was 2.99. The increase is a 0.76 for a total of 3.75. And you can read the asterisk piece. The town manager has agreed with that position, and he's agreed to pick up the costs of the $120,000 needed to keep that program. Now, we'll continue to evaluate that, and in fact, many of you may not know, but as part of the strategic planning, this spring, everything's on the table. We look at things like, what are cost-saving measures that are good for the district? What are the programs servicing, and what are those needs? Sometimes needs change over time. What are positions that are desirable for improvement, but what's essential? And we'll be examining all of that as part of the strategic plan that we put together going forward in a multi-year step. So that's the overall. Yep.
Will you be going back to the fiscal year 19 budget update as you were verbalizing through? Everyone's got this handout that describes.
We have it in here.
It's
Yep.
included in here?
Yep.
Okay, so we'll get to it then.
Yeah, I'm going to have Jim talk specifically about the special education.
Okay.
And
that's
what
good.
that looks like over time.
I didn't want to steal your thunder there.
Yep. So there's,
I do have a question though about this slide, if that's okay.
yeah.
And maybe Lynn can speak to this, but why would you structure it? I'm sure there's a reason, I just don't know it. That the town manager's funding the program versus it actually being included in the school budget for this year.
Well, it is in the school budget for this year, but
I
you're saying in
understand, but,
terms
like-
of the, yeah, so, you know,
C-
we've talked about that, Jim. You know, to us, either way, it's, you know, if you put it in, it would be probably 399.
So just out of curiosity, like, what is the thought process behind that? What was Andrew's potentially? When you-
Looking at, we didn't want to increase the base, which then in turn increases it over year after year after year. The agreement and the conversations between the town manager and the superintendent were that he would agree to give him the 120 to fund the program this year, because this is a program that's supposed to have savings, and we're anticipating the savings are gonna kick in the following year in 2021, which then it wouldn't need that additional $120,000 to fund the programs.
So you're anticipating that you'll fund it for year one, but then by next year, this will
It'll
be,
support itself.
it will support itself, and so there'll be no additional costs. And you didn't want to increase
The base.
the base so that the cost of level services
Correct.
year over year.
Truly level
Okay.
service. Yep.
So really, so it's really not 3.75%
It
increase.
is a 3.75, this is over and above the 3.75, so he's getting a 3.75 increase over last year, and then he's getting.
Plus 120 grand.
Yes.
And
I
then
mean,
next,
the motion, the language specific, and we voted on school committee, I mean, will have to be the appropriated amount of the 120 plus the other costs.
and any increase next year would be based off of 50,580,000 instead of 50,700,000.
So the base doesn't change.
And you'll see it in our budget presentation, where you'll see the base increase, and then there'll be a separate line for special ed for the additional.
So when you present the town side, your cost of, this is not included in your,
It will be, but it's on a separate line,
so that your base doesn't change either.
correct. No,
Or
it's
do you-
included in my total on my budget, but when you look at, you'll see within the groupings under education, and we did this a couple years ago too, when we were funding some sped.
I think I
issues.
remember it.
So we put the base in, and then we have a separate line within the department of the school budget for the extra 120 for special education specifically.
Yeah, so it's really the mechanism of how that happens to us,
I
it's a
understand.
certain amount of money.
And those savings are anticipated to come from having fewer out-of-district placements because we have the social and emotional learning structure in place?
Yeah, it absolutely could. It could be preventing an out-of-district placement, or it could be
Right.
bringing a student back.
Or
It
bringing
could
a
be a move-in that already has a therapeutic placement in their in the program. And what I had discussed with Andrew Mailer is, look, he's willing to fund it this year. We'll have extensive review and look at this, and make some decisions going forward. The trends typically in special education. We've seen an increase in the need for therapeutic intervention programs around social emotional learning for younger kids, mental health issues for young kids, and some of the complexities in which some districts don't have the ability to deal with it. So, do I think, yes, we'll see those savings? but it will still be something we'll have to look at next year and continue to look at with all of our programming. This is definitely a need. But we also have to look at all the current programming we have, entry and exit criteria, who's in the pipeline. Sometimes you service a particular need, like a language-based disability for a short period of time, and then just the cohort of kids changes. So it's something that needs constant review. I'm not one to say we're always going to do it this way because we have. I think we need to be creative. I think we need to look at how we best provide educations for kids, because one thing about North Andover is we have, it's been a rapidly changing demographic in North Andover. I think it's leveled out, but the complexity in which students come to us with trauma backgrounds, with PTSD, low income, English not the first language, special education, very challenging. And it's a challenge you see across Massachusetts and, frankly, probably the nation. So the proposed increase is for 20. A high school nurse. North Andover High School is 1,450 or so kids. There have been 2 nurses there. One has been paid for by a grant for the last 5 years, and they're coming off the grant this year.
Grant money?
Well, it's a competitive grant, and we're applying for more. But at the same time, when we met as a group, you talk about essential. That's essential. There's just no way around it. There's a myriad of needs. And if you really get excited about health and nursing, tune into our presentation on school committee about the visits and how many kids we service a day. It's quite something. It's in our presentation from last year right on our website, too. Elementary teachers, these are the 3 I mentioned earlier to continue to meet that goal. This will be the 3rd budget cycle to make a total of 8 added to the elementary level over the last 2 budget cycles plus this one. And I'd like to also reserve the ability, as we study the enrollments, we typically appropriate these but don't place them until May because we need to know where the kids are. We need to know what the needs are. And one of the things that, we got to catch up on is there are related services when you add classrooms. I think last year we really pieced together, Jim, what do we have? 5 or 6 different specialists that go to the ECC, the Bradstreet every day for like 1 period, to put that together because we've added classrooms. So it's really something we need to certainly look at.
How many teachers do you, it's kind of how many classrooms do you have left to fill that you anticipate you'd like to fill with elementary teachers going forward?
These 3 are definitely needed, and then I think we have to look. I think, our enrollment based on the Rutgers projection model and the Jim Mealy projection model has somewhat leveled out. What's really key is there's 2 components. One is our population has really stayed close to that 5,000 mark for a while. But we have pressure points where a lot of babies were born in one particular year, as we discussed in our meeting, but previously. So that's one component. The other thing is the kindergarten enrollment varies each year, and we use the census, we scour the census. We call every preschool within probably a 20-mile radius, the principal and Judy Rogers, Dr. Rogers, Mary Lou call to see what we have for potential kids coming in. The reality is there's some really stable parts of this community where we know who's coming, and the other reality is we have a very transient population at some of our schools. I think it was last year, Atkinson added 81 kids after the winter break and had 22 move-outs. Thompson, similar. So all the old 2 families down on Marblehead, Beverly, they're 3, 4, 5s now, and places like Woodridge are much more stable. There's a wait list, but we've seen a lot of folks in and out, particularly down at the Federal Veterans Housing Projects, down at Grogan's Field. We see a lot of transient population at Royal Crest. I remember as a kid when Yaz's dad lived there, Mark Bavaro lived there to finish his degree at Merrimack College, Rick Middleton and the Bruins lived there, and there were no kids. Right now we have the latest numbers, I think it's 279 kids from Royal Crest attend our schools. That's a very transient population. The increase in homelessness in North Andover has increased. We have kids, for whatever particular reason, are deemed under the McKinney-Vento Federal Act, where we have to provide transportation and bring them in. And the Columbia Gas situation certainly didn't help with some of that, with the only caveat that folks that we had to bus from within a 30-mile radius under the law of McKinney-Vento, we have a line item at Town Hall that I believe Lynn will be sending the bill to Columbia Gas because we have kids in hotels, and under the law, they have the right to remain in their school of origin.
So I understand the population changes, but do you, regardless of that, so we had been given, and I don't remember what the number is, these many classrooms, I think it was, 7 or something like that, elementary classrooms?
It's in the chart coming up.
Okay, sorry.
I gave 3 scenarios.
Perfect.
And we're at 14%. I gave a scenario when I presented it, 2 teachers added this year, 4 added this year, and 6. I think 6 brought us to the 7.9. The school committee had a lot of discussion about that because I said, we may not get there. I'm fine with having an aspirational goal around it, but adding the 3 teachers this year, if they're all classroom teachers, brings us to right at about 11% above the classrooms. But like I said, I think, that's a metric that I'll be changing in the strategic plan as we look forward. So it's going to depend on what 5th graders move out, how many kids from private kindergartens come to our 1st grade, and then we've seen a range from 303 kindergartners to 350, and somewhere in between. And we have the data on all of that. So that's what impacts that at the elementary. Reading teacher, we need to continue to provide targeted intervention for kids who need it. High school teacher. This is one that came out of my entry plan, and where I said I reserve the right to make a recommendation, not change an objective or initiative, but make a recommendation. So for example, this year I had heard that we had some kids get into AP chemistry, but it was full. When it all shook out, we got a lot of kids into different AP classes, but it may not have been the chemistry, the science-based they wanted to take as juniors. And this is the first year probably that's happened, at least with that chemistry class. I'm not saying we're going to add a chemistry teacher for that, but what I am saying is we need to give the high school principal the flexibility he needs as the requests come in for courses, that this will be a science/mathematics teacher, and whether we need to add a college prep mathematics course that we want to push kids to get into honors, whether we need to add an honors math class or an AP chemistry class, whatever that may look like, we need the flexibility to have that 1.0 FTE. It very well could come down to we're hiring someone, 0.25 or 0.2 to teach, one chemistry class for the week. But we need that flexibility. That's an unmet need. Any kid that works to get into AP, in my opinion, should have the ability to take it at that time. EL support. Last year's high school graduating class had 25 seniors in it who graduated, who were born in 25 different foreign countries. We have over 27 different languages here in North Andover, and the increase, particularly as of late, is our Brazilian Portuguese population. We're servicing more kids. And when I say EL, servicing is different than kids whose English is their first language. Most of our students test out under all the state testing by middle school, but what we've seen an increase in is traditionally, if there's 50 kids at, for example, roughly, say we have 100 kids at elementary, typically 50 are at Atkins and 50 are at Thompson. That's the biggest population. There's been some shifts, but at the high school and middle school, we used to see 6 or 7 kids because our kids would test out and just need, a monitoring under the law and following the law. Now we're getting a lot more move-ins at the high school and the middle school who have never been in our system that need this support. And, those numbers have gone up in the past. Particularly this year, the high school is more around like 12 to 15, and the middle school is the same, anywhere between 11 and 15. So we need to increase hours there. As Jim mentioned, Title I funding was slashed by over $200,000 this past year. It was a real blow to some of the creative programming we do for kids. The middle school was considered a Title I targeted assistance school. We had to take it off this year. They used to get really the crumbs of Title I because the majority of the need and the formula-based percentage was Thompson and Atkinson and the service provided there. But this 7,500 goes a long way. They have a mentoring program after school where we have adults connect with kids, whether it's around organization, whether it's around mentoring, whether it's around a whole host of things. It gives an adult the ability to connect with a kid. And let me give you an example the first year we did it. The first year that we did it before school program. And the same group of kids the year before by winter break had an aggregate total of 17 suspensions. The following year when we put this in the morning, that same group of kids had the aggregate total of 1 suspension. So it's really been helpful. And I used to use the term, and I think I did here, maybe at risk. I'm calling it at hope now. At hope instead of at risk. The Brad Street School has 1.8 administrators this year. That was only a temporary co-principalship. It's one of the largest schools in North Andover. It's over 500 kids. And I'm looking to add 0.2 so that we hire a campus principal in charge of the entire campus. And then the second position will really meet the needs of the special ed needs, the early intervention needs, all the components that typically go along with an integrated special education preschool with half typically developing peers and half special education students, as well as someone who understands early childhood development.
So just so I understand clearly, so that's not 2 principals, it's one, they're separate functions? Or are they both called principal, like how does that play out?
Right now, there's administration for 1.8.
Yep,
The previous superintendent decided to call them co-principals for the year. It was a 1-year temporary fix.
I see.
That being said, a school of that size needs at least 2 administrators with 505 kids under 6. And
I can barely handle 1, so.
yeah. So my point being is, we had a tremendous person who didn't ever have the title of principal or co-principal, who served as the director of the Early Childhood Center on that side. The needs for meetings for special ed, early intervention, all sorts, not just special ed, but just the needs of a place like that. We still have those needs, and those needs are also in kindergarten as well. But we also have the need to have one boss in charge of the entire campus. So this is an increase of 0.2 to have a principal in charge, and that second person, although they were called co-principal for the year, would have more of a title in line with director of early intervention, special education.
Supporting the
There's
departments. scores
of meetings, IEPs, 3-year reevals, initials, which is critical. So, and just to be really clear, I mean, there's someone who's awesome there. They may apply to go for the principalship, or they may want to be that, that other role.
Right.
And that person's going nowhere. And that person, folks want to name the building after that person. She's one of the most remarkable educators that I've ever worked with in my life, besides Peak and Cannon. So, and then on the other side, we need to bring it in because it's complex. I mean, it's 505 kids. So.
Okay, just because I just want to be clear because I was unsure about that. Thank you.
Yep. And NEASC, that's the cost associated with the reaccreditation. So we're asking for 5.7 positions total. James, benefits of working together.
Yeah, Gilly, let me do this one because it's one of my favorite slides. We've already talked about a lot of these things where we've consolidated a number of operations, including facilities, technology, and legal. And recent beneficial initiatives include the Medicaid reimbursement becoming available to the school department, the creation of the Special Education Stabilization Fund, the site work to make the Early Childhood Center project possible, support of the application that we've had for the last couple of years to MSBA for the middle school, and we have partnered on the solar credits project, and we continue to talk about a way that we might handle utilities better, and I forgot to put on this list the free kindergarten, which was really indicative of the partnership in that the town trusted us that Chapter 70 would increase enough to offset the money that they would have to put up because we were going to lose for a year the funds we were collecting for tuition for half-day kindergarten. And they trusted us, and it came true, and we were able to put in full-day kindergarten, where Andover, our next-door neighbor, has struggled for a few years now to try to set up full-day kindergarten, haven't been able to do it yet. So.
We do get a lot of calls from Andover.
in there somewhere?
We needed that comment.
We do get some calls from some parents that say, we notice we spend a little more in Andover sometimes, and we don't have this, and this, so proud of the work that.
But
we've
yeah,
done
it's
working
just
with these guys.
indicative of the partnership that we've been able to develop. And we continue to look for areas where we can benefit.
You guys were kind enough to provide us with some questions you had, and we'll just get started. You know, special education, someone was asking why isn't that a critical area? They may have just missed it. It was actually one of the top 3 in my entry plan. Typically, special education isn't one of the top 3 in an entry plan if you look at the results of the 65 new superintendents in the Commonwealth this year. You know, so I've seen a lot of entry plans over the years, but it's identified as one of our top 3. And it's an area that we're already taking steps with, restructuring in central office. It's also an area that we'll be examining very thoroughly this spring as we move forward. So when you look at special education on the following page looking forward, our goal, you know, we want to educate folks in a fiscally responsible manner. You know, it gets my blood boiling a little bit. I hear some presentations in other communities, they talk about cost avoidance. We're talking about kids. We're talking about kids who deserve the best education to get ahead in this world. And our job is to do it in a fiscally responsible manner, but we also have to do what's best for them. We need to add the supports for our classroom teachers as part of the professional development so that Tier 1 and Tier 2 interactions with kids can better support them. And everything's on the table this spring. We'll be, as part of preparing for the strategic plan, to continue to revise and adapt. We're going to look at all the programming. What's effective, what's not effective, what are the changes, what's our service model look like, can we do this in a better way, is this what's best for kids? And also, you know, when we looked at the critical areas, there were really 4 that came out in the strategic plan. The entry plan. You know, tackling, you know, meet the needs of all students with a specific focus on special education. That's unique to be in the top 3 of an entry plan when special education only makes up, I think, 13.9% of our student population here in North Andover. And in Massachusetts, it typically ranges between 13 and 17, 18, something like that. You know, and you can see, number 1 was decrease class size. 2 was create stability and consistent leadership across the district and in the superintendency. That was another not odd finding, it was just a different one. I think it's, you know, the fact that I'm the 4th superintendent in 9.5 years and the 9th in 14. And then the 3rd one was special education. It was nice to see props to compare to going back to Dr. Price's or Dr. Hutchinson's or Chris Hoddle's entry plans. Academics came up as number 1, and it came up here in a positive way, continue to provide and develop a rigorous and consistent curriculum across the district. So, if you go over to the next page, Mr. Mealy.
That was me. And as we extol the virtues of our partnership, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about a partnership we actually do have with Andover. And it's been in place for a few years now. There was a grant that was available. Andover approached us and said we could partnership on this grant. We're responsible for many of our students from 18 to 22. And a lot of those students were going out of district to complete after they graduated high school. The program was set up, the top program. It's in Andover. We split the cost with them, and we've gone from 6 students the first year to next year it looks like we'll have 30 students between the 2 districts. And I can tell you that Gilly mentioned the term cost avoidance. The cost of sending those students out as opposed to this program is easily $1 million a year. So that program's been extremely beneficial. And it looks like it's continuing to grow. Now we're even talking about how can we expand it and make it attractive to other districts who have the need that we might be a good alternative for going out of district.
I remember when that started.
Yep. So it's been very successful. So the second question had to do with the SEL program and what was the plan to cover its costs in 18-19 and what were the results. As you'll see when we talk about this year's budget update, the projections for out of district were down come May, so it looked like we had funds to the previous superintendent that we could cover this program and put it in place. It had been recommended for quite a while that we establish this program. So she saw an opportunity and thought she'd take it. The budget for FY19 versus the actuals, and if you go to the second one, you can see the answers to these parts, was out of district tuition savings didn't materialize. We actually have seen increases, as Gilly mentioned earlier. So this year it's $116,500. Given step increases for staff, that projects to $120,000, which is the amount that's going to be covered by the town manager for FY20, and then we'll have to make the decision come next year if the program is worth sustaining or not. And what that covers is a teacher and 2 teaching assistants. The source is the town for this year, and it's included as part of the school budget. It's not in there, as Lynn said, because it would have increased the base above the 3.75%. And this cost would continue into future years if the program proves to be effective, but it will have to be moved into the school operating budget beginning in FY21. And just as a last note, the savings to the operating budget from these programs, so basically the break-even point, to put it bluntly, for any of these programs is $65,000 per student. So a program that is costing us $120,000, if it's serving 2 students who definitely would have gone out of district, then it's self-sustaining.
Jim, does that include transportation, the 65,000?
That's an additional savings. No, the $65,000 is the average out-of-district placement.
Yes.
And $10,000 to $12,000 a year is the average transportation cost. So the third question has to do with special education. Has increased significantly over the past few years. Please provide additional information on this increase in spending. Specifically, please provide a breakdown of the amount spent by area. So if you look at it, it looks like, and I have a chart after this one that kind of highlights this, but one year to the next is very volatile. You've got out-of-district expenses that go down, and then they go up a lot the next year, so it looks like, oh, that increase is big. So what I did is I looked back to FY14 and showed from FY14 to FY19, the average percentage increase in special education costs is 2.48%, which is not bad at all. It fluctuates a lot. It's like a roller coaster, but average, it's been 2.48.
I see that, but 2.5 is like, that's nothing. Right?
Yeah, it's not bad at all. And that includes salaries. And so for FY20, the projected increase is 2.05%. So not as bad as it can look if you look from one year to the next. And highlight that in the chart. You can see in salaries where we added programs in FY18 at the same time that tuition out of district went way down. We were able to do that, and from 17 to 18, that's almost flat, which is unheard of. And then the next year you see the tuition out of district go up, and we added programs again, and so that looks like a huge increase. But over time it has been, like I said, 2.5%. And that brings us to a good time to talk about our current budget situation, FY19 update. And this was as of 1/7/2019. The way I did this is I showed you what would have happened if we hadn't added the programs, and then because those programs were added in May for this fiscal year, the impact that that has had. So if you look at the first column on the left where the programs weren't added, we were projecting out-of-district tuition at just under $4.5 million plus a 3% increase, which is what we normally see, 2 to 3% in tuition increases, which would have left us a contingency of $505,000 coming into the year. The actual out-of-district tuition right now is projecting to be just over $5 million. So that would have eaten up all of our surplus except for $43,000. It's what we would have had left over. Then you have, as Gilly talked about, the opening of a new school, the Ann Bradstreet Early Childhood Center, and additional staff needed to make that happen. The town had put up $100,000 for FF&E, which is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. The additional amount over the $100,000 is the $23,905 you see there. Additional construction costs, which included the kitchen, which included security and parking, among other things. The renovation was the existing building. The budget for that was $55,000. It ended up being $85,000. So in total, additional construction costs, $126,000, and then we had to add another bus to our fleet at a cost of $50,000. So the total to get the school up and running this year for unanticipated was $294,458, offset by what we would have had in special education funding would have left us at $250,000. So the funding from the town for the extra bus takes care of $50,000 of that. We, in any given year, charge our food services and our community programs indirect costs, use of our facilities, noon attendance, the time that they spend in the lunchrooms, not the time they spend outside. For a total of $100,000, we put off a van purchase, which would have been for that program we were talking about, the TOP program. As it's grown, now we need another van to get there, because part of the program is they spend time with the instructor learning things and how to be a good employee and things like that, and then get out to actual employment opportunities. And that's what the van does, is get them out there. So we delayed that for this year. And if, given all that, it would have left us just about $50,000 as a projected deficit, which we feel like, given closing out POs at the end of the year and some things that don't get spent in other accounts, that we would have broken even for the year. But if you look at the right-hand column, you can see just down in that first part there where I have SEL programs, as Gilly mentioned, $323,165 was the cost of those programs. So instead of a surplus of $43,564 in special education, it caused a deficit of $279,600, added to the deficit from the new school, totaled $574,059. So again, the $50,000 for the bus, the $100,000 for from the indirect costs, and the delay in the van purchase gets us not there, and then $250,000 we'll have to tap into the Special Education Stabilization Fund, gets us to a projected number right now of $121,000. So we've been working with town manager and Lynn, let them know about this. I am hopeful at this time, because since I generated this, we've been working hard on ways that we can offset this. And one of the things that we think we'll be able to do is increase the indirect costs. Programs have increased in community programs, especially food services. There's not a lot of room for movement there, but certainly in community programs, their revenues are up substantially. So we can certainly justify charging them for more indirect costs for the use of the facilities. And so we think that we'll be able to impact that number some more. That's where we are.
I just have a question then. Where does the funds for the extra bus come from the town side?
It'll come at the end of the year when I look at all our surpluses, and I usually come back to the finance committee and the board of selectmen to sign
Make an
off on.
adjustment.
I call the year-end shuffle.
Yeah.
Of funds.
That's where it'll
Yeah.
wash out at the end?
Yep.
Okay.
And if we continue with the year with not too much snow, it'll be a, I know, it'll be a positive.
Just remember last year,
Yeah.
we were fine until about this point in time last year.
Let's not
Okay.
talk about snow.
Hey, Red Sox are starting up pretty soon.
You
Hey,
don't want
I'm
to
already
work.
getting some tweets from kids saying, is there a delay already? I said, it's half an inch. Not
Even
even.
snowing?
Now they're asking about a polar vortex. I mean, I don't know who invented that word, but
I saw the movie.
relative to the charging for the community programs for more money, are you by chance at all sort of taking money that they would be investing in future things out of their back pockets? In other words,
No, actually, we are cutting ourselves off at $400,000. We want them to have a surplus. Industry standard is you should have 3 months' worth of operating expenses. And so 400,000 is that number for them. So we wouldn't let them go below that number.
Okay.
All right, moving forward, the school nurse, I think we covered it. Everyone understood that component, so I don't want to be repetitive.
well, I didn't know when I asked the question, I thought it was a one-year grant, and why would you go out and hire a person for 1 year under a grant when, and you told me it was a 5-year deal, so.
So we've already had the two for the over 1,400 students, and the grant is going away, so we have to add it to the operating.
But I got it, yeah.
Yep.
There were some questions about the middle school renovation. The middle school causes me some serious consternation of some of the highest class size out of our 20 comparable districts. We have since applied, we applied 2 years ago to the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and we received some positive feedback on our application, and it actually moved, to the next round of this preliminary stage. But let me be really clear. Oftentimes it takes 4, 5, 6, 7 applications to even get into a queue or a pipeline to start the next stages. And oftentimes, this can be anywhere from a year to over a 10-year project. There are some communities that have applied 8, 9 times and not made it forward. We did apply the second time. It's important for folks to know that each application is mutually exclusive each year. It's all dependent on the need of that specific year. I was hopeful. This year we were one of 70 applicants. They've already been out to our district to do a site visit. We had already had, when we had the Brad Street being constructed, a team do a walkthrough with estimated costs for an addition. As you may know, we're proposing a 15, 16-room addition that would be STEM area in terms of science. Although we have the new curriculum running at the north end of a middle school. That building was built in 1954 as the high school with a renovation in 1994. And the current labs, really serve as, they have traditional lab tables and some of those things. And I think we do a really great job in terms of the curriculum, but we're not doing the things that we could be doing with an appropriate lab. I just recently read an article called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. It talks about the skills kids need going forward. And then I was also looking at the top 10 jobs and the skills needed for those jobs in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And most of them are science, medical, or service-related. So if we can get this addition, it would give us the ability to do a couple things. One, it would give us the ability to run science classes in an appropriate area. And then 2, it would free up the other science classes that could easily be converted or used as a traditional classroom. Because out of our comparable districts, we're in the bottom. We are in the bottom in terms of class size for the middle school. It's one of the largest middle schools for a suburb, probably anywhere with 1,200 kids. And there's just physically no more space. There is physically no more space there. So that being said, I was hopeful that sometimes a project in this range of about, I'd say about 25 million, Jim?
Correct.
Can be attractive to the MSBA because, they might be doing Somerville High School for $386 million. They might be doing another school for $292 million, and then there's some scraps to pick up where they have to fill it in. It's a very competitive process. I know that North Andover High School, for example, was probably funded through the MSBA at about 67, 68%, if I recall correctly, back in 2004. Miss Allen might have a better recollection on that. But the funding mechanism is also tied to community income. And I think at this time, hopefully we can get in the MSBA pipeline, but I think the reimbursement to North Andover would probably be in the 45, 46%, right around there. Having said that, this is a long process. John Kennedy once said, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, it was probably 20 years ago, but plant it today. And I think that's the attitude we have to take. We have to be proactive. I think if you read my executive summary and some of the literature that I put out on the web, and the nightly news, et cetera. I think, I think we need to know the facts about everything. So, it's not that we're taking a position on this is how we do it, but what does it look like with MSBA? We're applying again this spring. Jim and I have a meeting coming up with one of their specialists to reapply. But I also think it's important that we start to have a conversation in the community. What would it look like if it was self-funded? What would it look like if it was part of a facilities master plan? And I think to speculate on things without knowing what that knowledge is, what it would specifically look like, would not be a good thing to do. I think it's important that we get it out there so that as a community we can have a conversation about this. We've talked about it on the town side and what this may look like. And I know it's hard for some folks because they say, well, my kid's going to be gone by then. Well, you know what? I've got a 5th grader at Thompson. He's most likely not going to see an addition at the middle school possibly in the next 3 years. But like many other communities, I think it's important that we at least explore all those options and have a discussion. So,
I'm like you. My kids are out of the school. One will be shortly. But the strength in the community starts with the schools, in my opinion. And the benefit, and I'll give you an example under your leadership at Thompson. I bet if I were to go back and do a property valuation study of that neighborhood, because of what you did, the property values went up. And by this investment, whether or not you get a kid in school, the town benefits, whether fiscally, financially, or just morally. I mean, it's a good thing. So I get that.
So under those 3 scenarios, when will we start as a community evaluating those? So I understand we have an application for MSBA, and then we have a facilities master plan process, but to look at all 3 kind of holistically, as well as the self-funded piece, are you doing that with the school committee in the spring, or is that something that
that would be
is
something
ongoing? Or
well, that would be something Jim and I would have to continue to connect. It's probably something we'll put in our strategic plan about a timeline. When would we talk to the people? Who are the right folks to talk to about this? Who are the folks who would have the right projections around this? Because that's not something that's going to happen quickly either. It's but it's important. What I'm saying is, I want it to be known that it's important to start thinking about the future with this. Although it might not benefit my son, Michael Gilligan, who's a 5th grader, it's going to be beneficial to the town. So, I think that's something Jim and I and Lynn, and we've talked with Andrew. I brought it up this year. I think just coming out of the Brad Street and wrapping that up, has been a lot of work. But I put it out there. I think it's something that we're going to need to start. So I think that we'll have to think about how to talk about it and just how do we get the information to see what that looks like.
and is that budgeting a consultant in advance to kind of figure that out?
I'm not sure if consultant's needed. Jim, what are your thoughts?
So it's complicated in that you have the Facilities Master Plan Phase 2, and there's 3 elementary projects that are going to get done. And you have the middle school. Is it going to be funded through the MSBA program, or are we going to have to fund it ourselves? At what point do we say it doesn't look like that's going to happen, so we have to do it ourselves? So it's all tied together. And I know the conversations will be starting pretty soon for Facilities Master Plan Phase 2. And so when we get into that, we have an estimated cost right now of the elementary projects. Mm-hmm. It's just over $10 million for the 3 of them. When we get better numbers, is it more? And so that can't really be done through the way we've been funding the master plan. Does it need to be done some way else? And then you might bring the middle school into the conversation at that point. So we don't have the definitive answer, but those are the conversations we're having.
So I have another question. If you start in advance of being accepted by the MSBA, so if you start with consultants in advance, like you hire an architect and they start a little bit of work, or you whatever consultants you need to start the process of a middle school expansion, do those costs then get considered as part of that application and as part of the total that they reimburse?
So
the way
they do the process is you wouldn't hire anybody until you were approved for the project. So you wouldn't, and you have to utilize their project manager and they give you a list, usually three project managers and three architect firms that you get to choose from and hire. But that wouldn't happen until you knew you were approved for the project. And then, yes, those costs are reimbursed at the same rate as the construction costs.
There were some significant changes to the MSBA. I think it was probably after there was a massive high school built just near Boston. It was the highest cost of any school in the Commonwealth, in the history of the Commonwealth, which certainly has been surpassed by the Somerville and the projection for Lowell, if they can ever find a site, where the MSBA, I wouldn't say they went to cookie cutter, but they wanted to unify, have more, codify what some of these designs look like, and it's more, I think, of, this is the site, these are the types of designs we're doing in other places, to get more bang for their buck.
So if we started the process, so if we hired an architect in advance, does that rule us out from being accepted by the MSBA?
It's not an either or.
Okay.
I think that you run the risk sometimes, and I've seen communities, I won't mention them, but I know of a community too, that has put a lot of money into a project and even spent millions, and then not gone forward with it. I think we need to be fiscally responsible. I think that it's not either or. I think it's concurrently. So, we're going to apply. We also know that there's going to be planning for the Franklin one year. Next year, there'll be building. We know that they'll be planning the year of the building at Franklin for the Atkinson. Next year, the shovel's going in the ground for the Atkinson. And the same with the Kittredge the following year. So I think we have to look at all these different things. I just certainly wanted to raise the idea of, and I don't think it requires a consultant, because we have the folks who look in, we have a sense of what the money is. Just what would these options look like?
Well, I guess my point, so I should just get to it, is could you still continue to apply and at the same time, hire an architect to go through that process until the point of your shovel ready, so that you basically are eliminating a year or two or however many years it would take to go through that process after you accept it into the MSBA. So it's like a course that you're running at the same time, similar to what you've been
So there's a
saying.
couple of risks. One would be
Big
that
risks.
you double dip, or not double dip, but double pay.
Because then you have to use their
because
consultant,
then you have to use
their team.
architect.
Yeah.
At the same, right, and at the same time, it might be that you can't use their work, or you'd have to add to it, because the standards that the MSBA use for construction are usually higher than
Code.
the normal town code. And so the cost of the project is usually more, but with the reimbursement, you still end up not paying nearly as much as you would have if you did it yourself. But the overall total cost of the project and the scope of the project is more than what you would have originally designed for.
So we are relying on MSBA grant, and what if we don't get it? Have we, or are we thinking on self-funding options? Have we started thinking on those lines?
My point being is that's a conversation I think would have to start to have.
So we haven't
I think it would be
started.
premature with the facility master plan with Atkinson coming up. The others, I think, with all of the other funding mechanisms that impact the yearly budget, like the Foundation Budget Review Committee and the budget that just came out with that, circuit breaker and the funding of that. There's a lot of different factors, not to go into the specific building, but we have some things in the pipeline. And as much as I'd like to see things happen really quickly, whether it's MSBA or another option, that's going to take time. That will not happen overnight. And I think that we have time to be able to do that and not put us at a disadvantage. I just think it's something that I raised because certainly this is what other communities raise. I mean, if they can't get in the MSB pipeline, it doesn't mean that they're going to self-fund. It doesn't mean that they're going to look at a master plan. It's just important, I think, to know what those options are.
People are asking about it. They
Yep.
want to know.
Yep. That's why I bring it up.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yep. Because, there's a possibility we don't get the MSBA.
Right.
The leadership structures, next topic. We, as I said earlier, so I talked about this a little bit. We wanted to review the structures. We made some changes at the high school that were pretty cost neutral. Bringing department heads back and eliminating facilitators who were paid a stipend. We were then going to make some changes in Dr. McQuaid's last year, but I said, why are we going to do that in the last year? We're going to have a new principal coming on, and I really think that that person should have some input into this. So, and then the third year out was to look at the elementary structures. Based on where we are now, we've made some changes at the high school, of taking a hard look here at central office to make some changes in terms of restructuring a position. The first step in elementary would be adding that campus principalship for the .2, and then Jim's running a committee where we're looking at all the different options. It may impact the budget, it may be somewhat cost neutral. We have to look at what those best structures are. We're hopeful that by the end of this year, we can make recommendations going forward for future years. And my point early on about possibly being multi-year plans, it might be something that we do over time. I think we talked about the curriculum fund.
Large fund, the question really is, no question relative to the value of what this is all about. It's just the transparency of how it's spent. That's what, I'd be interested, you probably don't have the schedule for that right now, but I'd be interested in knowing what the budget would be for fiscal year 2020, how you plan on spending $500,000, $600,000.
So you can see for this year, we can certainly produce, and we will, to Lynn for town meeting, what has been spent on. We did the same last year. So we track exactly what the materials are.
I'm sure you do.
Yep, and so we can produce that at any time.
Okay. Lynn, refresh my memory. If this year we had, I believe,
400,000 was approved for this year.
400,000, but you end up with $500,000 in Medicaid reimbursement, what happens to the 100,000?
Falls to free cash.
Okay. I'm fine. This is the classroom size percentages?
I think we covered this.
Oh, yeah, you beat a dead horse here, so I'm fine.
And, you can see that chart. Sasha, that was the one that I talked about. I gave some different projections back in the school committee when we started talking about budget directives, or the school committee budget directives. Jim, you want to talk about that last page, the class size percentages? I mean, I think I hit it, but
I think we did.
are you guys?
The formula is pretty simple. It's just the number of, right now, that percentage is the number of classrooms over the guidelines divided by the number of classrooms. So if a simple one would be 15 classrooms over, of 100 classrooms, that would be,
So that's just a plus and minus kind of way of looking at things, and that doesn't quite get you there, does it? I mean,
so I did use it as an example because somebody said, well, take Kittredge for instance, we're at 14.7.
right.
Right? It's the best example that you could have pointed out to reflect if we had, when the year started, if we had 48 students and we said, all right, we're going to have 2 classes, that would have been 24. And if anyone moves in, you're going up to 25 or 26. But if we have 3 classes, they're at 16. And if anyone moves in, big deal. But what happened was some students actually moved out this year. And so you get below 16 and people are like, wait, why would that happen? Well, that's exactly why it would happen.
Okay.
But I do want to give a good reason. Oftentimes, you can see a number like that, and it's deceiving. When you talk about running specialized programs and the law of IDEA and special education, you talk about all kids you want to put in the least restrictive environment. So oftentimes, decisions about where we place classrooms are about size, but they can also be about the makeup, the needs of that specific class. Whether it's significant populations, you're not speaking to that school in itself, but that school has a really specialized special education program. Just like Franklin has a program for autism, just like the Sargent has a medically fragile. So oftentimes, it's easy for someone to say, well, there's only 15 in a class there. There's real specific reasons. It's not willy-nilly like, hey, let's have this small for a year. We have to really look up the makeup of the needs, and those makeups are special education. Are they English language learners? Are they Title I students from low income? Are they students from the therapeutic intervention program who we want to integrate as much as possible and provide those supports? So it's really kind of complex. So it would seem really easy from the outside, but it's something we agonize over as working with the principals to figure out, because the principals, when we had that position, could have made a good argument to, let's do this in a particular classroom, but we really would have lowered class size in one school. But we thought, as principals and as a leadership team, putting it here made more sense based on needs.
That's it. Any other questions?
Chair recognizes Thomas.
Well, first of all, I thought this was one of the most informational last, hour and entertaining. No, and I really mean it honest.
That's high praise from Thomas.
I compare this to Andrew, who certainly also always provide a lot of information, and it was always entertaining, really interesting to listen. But really what I learned, and it's something I was not really so aware of, is you're talking about that you have more and more students, which is, it's a lot more complicated to deal with, with the background, different languages, coming from, low-income families with, probably with a history which is, for us, growing up in a different world, difficult to comprehend. Do you see now, is this now an increasing portion of the student population, and how are we actually prepared for that? Do we have the resources? Do we have the teachers? And I'm, I have to be careful. I don't want to get into a wrong position here. I'm all for it, to spend the money to give a more complicated population the chances to develop over time. But is then really a 3% increase year over year? When you look at that, really enough?
A couple components to it is, one, is there's probably never enough money in any district to intervene and provide intervention that's needed for every kid. And I don't say that lightly. I say it in the sense of, we need to provide two things. One is, we need to equip teachers with the skills and things they need to work with kids in classroom interventions, and that's called Tier 1, to deal with these types of things. Teachers go to school to study math. They go to school to study child development. They don't necessarily go to school not even until a few years ago, to study trauma history, PTSD, sexual abuse survivors. So we need to be able to arm kids as teachers with the skills for these Tier 1 interventions, and that's something we're working on. That's where you get your bang for the buck, by providing the training. And we have hired, through a grant, a director of social emotional learning, one of the first probably anywhere in the region. And there's 3 goals for that person, and she's a dynamo. She's going at it full tilt. The first year was to look, which was last year, was to look at our Tier 3 programs. That's really specialized sub-separate programming. The kids have intensive needs. Make sure we have all the support needed and train the folks to be able to run that the best to support kids. Then secondly, is how does this person work with our staff of school psychologists, guidance, all those folks, so that we have a systemic approach to helping these kids, if they need to come out of class in a particular school, or whatever the strategies needed. That's called Tier 2. And then the Tier 1 is, how do we make teachers aware of all of the different challenges? Now, it seems daunting, but the best thing we can do is arm them with the skills and strategies to be able to do so. So we also have a website for parents. So if you click on our North Andover Public Schools and go to Social Emotional Learning, we have a whole thing for parents, and I've been trying it. Because although like 5,000 kids in the district listen to me, I feel like my 2 at home don't listen to a thing I say. They only listen to their mother. But it's not a joke. You go to the website, and it's strategies for parents. So what's the behavior? You click on this, and then it has try this, this, and this. So it's really about education of our folks. Certainly, it's also about providing reading intervention. It's certainly about the smaller class size that we can personalize and develop relationships with kids, because the world of just transferring content knowledge is gone. we have to develop relationships with kids, we have to develop relationships with families. We have to continue to do things like have a off-site program at Woodridge. We have to continue to have nights for parents that don't speak English and bring translators in to involve them in. So it's no one size fits all. It's a whole bunch of components to it. But I think with the social emotional learning and trying to provide teachers and all staff with what they need to best serve these kids and understand where they're coming from is the best first step.
And just to add to that too, Gilly mentioned that we're working on a 3-year plan, and that's really the main focus of the 3-year plan is how are we going to best meet these needs that we're seeing. You saw in what we're proposing for new is additional EL support, and the long-term plan for that is to move from tutors to actual positions, similar to reading teachers, and we're actually adding reading teacher time in the before and after school program. Those are all ways that we're trying to meet those needs, the increasing needs you're talking about. And what was really encouraging when we met with the principals to talk about what we term the leadership structure of the elementary and middle school going forward, it expanded into, well, how do we set the schools up, leadership and resources to meet those needs? So I think you'd be encouraged by the 3-year plan that we're going to be developing because it addresses the things you're asking about.
And the other things too is I'm working very hard right now to develop partnerships we've never had. Let me give you an example. I'm developing a partnership with the Department of Children and Families, formerly known as DSS. There's only 2 foster families in all of North Andover. It's not uncommon for a kid, for no fault of their own, to be taken from their family in North Andover, placed in a home in Lynn, Worcester, down as far south as Quincy, and then we transport them back to school. Oftentimes they go to homes where the language spoken in the home is not the language that our kids speak. So the state has a grant to work with the Department of Social Services. They've come to our PTO meetings to present. They've come to the school committee to present. And it's a small effort, but if we could just get 2 or 3 more foster families and someone who lives with a dad that happens to be incarcerated for 6 months, that's a huge life-changing thing that a kid could stay in his own community and be supported by his own community. Even though they're coming back to school here, a lot of these kids are an hour on a bus each way. So partnerships there. The partnership, I just became named to the board of social justice and education at Merrimack College. So I'm working closely with them. What can we do how can we get college kids and their grad student program kids involved as mentors for our young kids, almost like a big brothers, little sisters, big sisters, little brothers, something along those lines. We need to continue to have positive adults interacting with kids because oftentimes, you can go all over the state and oftentimes people confuse North Andover and Andover. Our demographics are just very different. They're just very different, the Atkinson school is 58% white, and Thompson School, very diverse. So all this diversity, we have to find ways to deal with in a way that probably not a lot of districts have. The urban districts have these issues, and this is something they've been focused on for years. But we're working on ways that we can do it, partnering with Rick Gorman and the Youth Center, partnering in Thursday night and bringing a memorandum of understanding so that we can share information with the new community psychologist, Deanna Cruz, who doesn't work for the schools but works for the town. Supporting families of kids who are being raised by grandparents because parents are dead from opiates and the opiate epidemic in the Commonwealth here, particularly here in the Merrimack Valley, devastating. So my point being is we have to tackle it by bringing Greater Lawrence Action Council and early literacy over to Woodridge and working in the rec rooms with kids 1, 2, and 3 being read to. It's a multi-pronged approach, but we have to develop relationships. I think I'm proud of the fact that I have a lot of relationships in the city of Lawrence, close with the former superintendent who's now the commissioner. My wife's actually the head of guidance at Lawrence High School with 3,500 students there. The city's 6.9 square miles with 15,000 kids. So there's a lot of nonprofit help in the city. I'm trying to connect with them more and more. We've been working on them with opiates and some of the other stuff. But we got to develop relationships that provide structures not only during the school day, but outside. Kids who need counseling. We realize that parents don't bring them to counseling. What have we done? We've worked to contract with different people who take those kids' insurance so that they can come and we can pull them out of one of their non-academic classes to receive these services in school. So there's no easy answer, but it is, it's a challenge. I think oftentimes, my experience in North Andover, and it's just anecdotal, but, I feel like maybe the middle class is somewhat shrunk a little bit. It's more haves and have-nots, and there's problems, in both sides. Significant problems can be on both sides. But, it's a challenge everywhere, so it's not unique to North Andover.
That's my question. Is it really, or maybe we are a little bit unique, and you just mentioned, there's the Thompson, the Atkinson School community, and then you have Franklin, Sargent community, and they are very different. And is the other community really supporting what you're doing here on the other, with the other community, and how long are they actually, be patient?
Yeah, I will say
that one side is not bringing down the quality of education, because you have to spend a lot of effort and money, and I support that, to bring that quality up. So when you merge them in middle school and high school, that there is not, a level here and a level there, and the other said, what I'm doing here,
some of our some of our Title I or low-income students are outperforming other students, from the Atkinson and Thompson. It's a challenge. I mean, even it's not just the money issue of this. I mean, just the mental health issues in terms of, social media. It's complex being a teenager today. So I would say that it's more of an asset to this community than a challenge, but it's certainly, there are unique challenges. I do like the fact that, like the Bradstreet, it brings families together that might not ever cross paths until middle school. And it brings parents together across race and socioeconomic lines where they might become friends with folks they normally might not run into. So are issues like this unique? No. But do a lot of communities struggle and probably have to start to have a conversation about cultural competency and what that looks like? Probably.
I also would be careful too, right? Because the Thompson district is the library district. It's really hard to find a house there for less than $350,000. So let's put this in perspective about the difference between. I mean, it's still.
It doesn't mean the Thompson could be outperforming other schools.
Well, that's another point, right? If you look at the recent MCAS scores, it's not I think there was variance between all the different schools and some of them.
The MCAS are new. We're leading the nation in every aspect of testing, AP, standardized testing, yet half of all of our students in grades 3 through 8 didn't meet expectations in Massachusetts. And on the same letter they sent to parents, it said we're #1 in the nation, leading the nation. So that's a test that's going to take a little while to be beta tested, normed. It's not going away, but it's just certainly challenges, and there's unique neighborhoods. I think the more that we can have people working to build, joining our Building Respectful Communities, our RAISE initiatives, the work we're doing, like Building Respectful Communities, and the amount of the different parishes and pastors and folks from nonprofits and Rick Gorman and parents, and that's the important thing. I think the diversity in our community is what makes us unique compared to other just straight suburbs that probably have populations that look more alike. And I think that is the strength. And I'd go back to your point and just end on this. Our kids are the most valuable commodity or resource in the Commonwealth right now, are these kids. These are people that are going to go on to do very, very, very special things. And just the last component, oftentimes kids who have challenges in life, they don't get behind in school, they get behind in experiences outside of school. So what can we do to do those things as well? And if I had the answer to all of it, I'd be really wealthy, and I probably wouldn't be here because I'd be consulting, probably on the national circuit.
I just look at the change of leadership, and I think it's a good one. The last 3 years, I didn't really hear that so much. So I'm really, glad and appreciate very much.
We've done good with the prior leadership, but we've done, it seems, even better with the current leadership, so we appreciate that quite a bit. I do have something before you leave, sort of piggybacking on your opening statement regarding Andrew and Lynn. A couple months back, the town received notice of the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award was granted to the town of North Andover. I forget how many years we've gotten this thing, put a nice little, but here's the problem. Here's the good thing. Much of this is under the leadership of Andrew, and clearly with the legwork of Lynn and her team when they put together the budget. It is first class, and it makes our job so much easier. But I want to go on to say that, too, that there is also a certificate of recognition for budget presentation. And it's presented to individual department designated as being primarily responsible for having achieved that award, having achieved this award. Was presented to Lynn. So that is a kudos to you. Again, making our job a lot easier, giving the town a lot more faith in its numbers. So I appreciate that so much, Lynn.
Does it come with a trip or anything?
And I'm going to Disney World.
We're gonna send you to the polar vortex.
Thank you very much. You don't have to stick around any longer, guys. You've put in long, long days. Very good presentation. I echo what Thomas said. This was very, very opening, very entertaining, very transparent, and wow, we've
Guys,
come a long ways.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to do so. I mean, oftentimes, schools, I was saying to Charles earlier, you know, when we hire positions, for example, it took me a couple times hiring a position, you know, an administrative position or something. And I said, oh, well, I have to make a glossary. There are so many acronyms in education. And then Stan made me actually do it. And, you know, and just in one conversation one day, I realized, you know, I said, you know, MCAS, AYP, you know, all these different things. In a 2-hour period, we had about 40 different things we said. And I'm thinking, those two parents probably had no idea what we're talking about. So
That's true in every industry, though.
I have no idea what they're saying.
But-
What they just said, I have no idea.
My point is this: we appreciate the thoughtful questions. They were very thoughtful, and we want to be as transparent as possible. You know, and as these things came up this fall, we met. We continue to work on them. We've worked very closely with Andrew, and we'll continue to do so with Lynn. And you know, the school board's been terrific in terms of, hey, if there's an issue, let's confront it. Let's confront our reality, and then let's figure out the best plan to move forward.
Agree.
So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, Lynn. Yeah. And tomorrow we have the final meeting of our revenue and fixed costs committee, where we get to go over the fixed costs and bless it,
We're
ask
spending
questions.
so much time together, people are gonna start talking about us.
I hear you. I hear you. I don't have any new business other than what we just presented to Lynn. Next meeting, is it the 12th, which is a Tuesday, or the 13th? I'm sorry?
It was a Wednesday.
It's the 13th, which is a Wednesday.
We were gonna have a conversation about that, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
If we,
Bring it up. Go ahead.
I don't remember I just know that date was, because it was a Wednesday.
Temporary,
We
yeah,
were
it
gonna,
was
it was
a
temporary. We're
tentative.
gonna find out if we needed to hold that or if we could vote on the next meeting. I don't
Actually,
have my
we-
computer because that
Yes,
doesn't
it was a
work.
tentative date.
The next meeting might be a quick meeting, but it is on the capital improvement plan,
to vote on it.
so we have to vote on it then.
I think we were trying to find out if we could vote.
We vote, yeah.
Never mind. I don't, usually I'd have my
And
computer up and I'd check the calendar and
The
know what I'm
budget
talking about.
is coming out on the 11th, I think, or thereabouts, and we're gonna be getting it the next day.
Great.
The operating budget. Tentatively, my plan, and always subject to change, but we had interviewed certain departments last year. We didn't interview certain departments, and I like to flip that around, basically, to interview, particularly the public safety, and again, the public works areas in particular, so that we get those bases covered. It seems like everything's running very smoothly, but I'd like to at least touch those areas at least once every 2 years. OPEB. Have you heard anything more, Charles? Chuck?
Not recently.
I know Chris Nobly's put it back up saying, oh, now that Andrew's leaving, we gotta put this back up in the forefront.
I talked to Chris.
Did you?
Yeah, about something else, and so I brought this up earlier this week or last week. So essentially what he said is that they were waiting on additional information from Andrew, and that was a priority before he left. And then that's why we had talked about, because Jen is no longer on the finance committee, having another representative with Chuck on the OPEB.
Yep.
Do you know what information we're waiting on?
I don't recall exactly. I think it was additional forecasts or a go forward or
Is he
something.
just sort of
Okay.
formalizing that plan that they put forward in the budget policy?
Potentially, but I think it has there's additional information and
Well,
meat.
let's put this one to aside for now, if we haven't have a permanent appointment besides Chuck, but, you know, if a meeting is called, I will attend that meeting with Chuck, in between. So, no matter what, there'll be two people there, Chuck and myself, or at least one of us. will be
I'll be
there.
able to go, yeah.
So we don't want to put someone else.
Not right
forward?
now, no. Because I don't even know when it's gonna be.
Okay.
People should be planning that. Sorry?
Is Andrew,
His last day is on a holiday, the 18th. Which
Okay,
means
so
he
he's
gets paid
still-
through the 18th. But they're just 17th, 16th, whatever that last week is, 15th, so. No, he's still around.
Does anyone want to take that role? Because I was going to say, if that's not the case, then you're like de facto anyway. So.
Okay, I'll ask the
Well, I
question.
just mean that might be.
Sasha's got a question. Ask the question.
Is anyone interested in an appointment to an OPEB committee?
We have a firm no here.
party.
Oh, yeah. It's a kick down.
Already divided into so many little slices.
You do.
Same.
with it.
Can't even imagine it.
Did you, are you interested?
No,
I'll pass, hard pass, actually.
Thomas?
no. But I think,
Sasha.
don't we have an
I
expert here?
am. I am.
It's nothing personal. I get it.
It's not. It's that I'm. So you're unless.
I have fun with these things. Oh, yeah.
There we go. So and then, but I'm. If you need a
Backup?
give me a call. Like
We'll
if
do
we
it.
need a.
That's
You're
true.
not doing
We can.
Well, I am.
Yeah.
We're
it's two-
doing a
it's two
second
people.
person.
Yeah.
Oh, a
Because
second.
Jen,
Because Jen
was
was
the
the
second
other
person
one.
and she's
Oh,
gone. So
okay,
that gives
okay.
us the full two representatives.
So we're
Perfect.
down Jen, and we're missing somebody, okay.
Yeah, Ed's not here tonight.
Ed's not here, we're
Yeah.
not like.
Is Mark going to appoint someone to replace Jen?
Still being talked about a little bit. He and I talked, and said, geez, you know, here we are already in the cycle.
Yeah.
Do we want to bring anybody on board?
In the middle.
Might be, personally, to be brought on board would be for the remainder of Jen's
I'm honestly not sure.
term, which ends this June 30th.
Right.
And my
Yeah, it seems-
recommendation would be for him to then, who we bring on board would be the person he would appoint again in the future, so.
Is
he and I haven't
Jen not
touched base.
returning?
I think you were not at the meeting
No,
potentially when
I-
she announced that.
See
She's
that-
she's no longer as of January, and she unfortunately was traveling for this meeting, so she's decided to focus on other
Also,
stuff.
she resigned?
Pardon me?
She resigned?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know.
You didn't know, I'm sorry.
No,
See, you're not
no.
alone. Tell
Okay,
them, no,
well,
First time I hear.
I thought she was, I thought she was going somewhere. She was leaving. I really did not know that she was quitting.
Oh, when she said leaving, she meant leaving.
She meant
Oh.
leaving.
Resigning.
I thought she was traveling somewhere like she always does, so.
no.
Well, that's why she's not here
That's-
today, but
No,
So in the middle or after the end
No.
of the term?
as of
Right
the
now.
end of January, done.
Other things to do.
I get that.
Yeah,
I get
it
that.
happens.
Okay,
Hey, do I have a motion?
I hereby move we adjourn.
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.